on educating law students to serve and partner with marginalized communities. I want to send an especially warm welcome to Dr. Poser. We're really pleased to introduce you to some of the work we've been doing at the clinic in collaboration with the community here in Long Island, and also to introduce you to some of the clinic alums who their work here has inspired them to go on to great things. My name is Theo Liebmann. I'm a clinical professor of law at the law school. I've been directing our youth advocacy clinic for 21 years. And I am very pleased to be moderating this panel with 3 of my colleagues who are doing extraordinary work in their clinics and through their clinic courses. Loris Wren, who's at the end there, who is the director of our clinical programs and the attorney in charge of the asylum clinic. Michael Haber, right next to me, directs the Community and Economic Development Clinic and was formerly the director of the Disaster Recovery Clinic as well. And then smack dab in the middle is Stefan Krieger, who's the Cardali Distinguished Professor in Trial Advocacy at the law school and the Director Emeritus of Clinical Programs. And we are equally fortunate to be here with 3 former clinic students who came into the clinic with their own passion for serving the community and social justice, but left with other lessons on how to accomplish those things. And brought them full-heartedly and, when necessary, full-throatedly into their post-graduation legal careers, which we're going to hear more about soon. Elise de Castillo, who's the executive director at Cardali out here on Long Island. Alex Knippenberg, who's an attorney at Brooklyn Legal Services. And Jonathan Zamir, an attorney at the New Haven Legal Assistance Association. Thank you. Before hearing from them, I want to take a few short minutes to give a little bit of context for the Hofstra Law Clinic. So, as I said, I've been here 21 years, and in my clinic, I work with young immigrants, primarily from the Northern Triangle, countries with a large presence among the immigrant communities out here on Long Island: El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And although I've been here 21 years, where someone says you look too young for that, but okay. Although I've been here 21 years, it is always fresh, the work for me. And there are 3 things that keep it so amazingly fresh for me. One is the students. Every semester, students bring fresh insights, energy, and passion to do the extremely difficult work they do. Some of the students from my clinic are here, so I determine how fresh those insights are at the end of the semester, but already I'm impressed. Secondly is really the honor and the privilege of working with our young clients who show really unimaginable grace and courage in spite of Byzantine and often cruel immigration rules and policies that they have to confront, and deeply traumatic experiences. But the final reason that it stays fresh is because the role of the Hofstra Law Clinic University is such a valuable one, such a meaningful one, not just to me, but to my colleagues here and to the community. The Hofstra Law Clinic is both of the university, but it's also of the community. Like most activities, academic activities at the university, it is a curricular venture. So it's an educational enterprise where we have a goal to provide law students with the chance to develop into skilled and passionate lawyers with a commitment to social justice and community service. We have been around since the inception of the law school over 50 years ago, and really are deeply intertwined with the DNA of the law school, which was founded with the idea that legal knowledge should be used to make an impact and serve. And the clinic is really the centerpiece of that ongoing. That educational part of our mission for students is exciting and deeply challenging, immensely rewarding, and really, really, really scary. For the current clinic students in the audience, I know that scary part, holding a client's future in your hands, especially at home. I can assure you that it's way more scary for your professors who have to hope that they adequately trained you to handle those situations. So the Hofstra Law Clinic is of the university and it is of the community. Our stated mission is to work with local disadvantaged communities and individuals to meet their legal needs. And for those individuals and communities, the clinic has also been around for those 50 plus years and has been the law school's most constant and direct interface. Geographically speaking, the clinic's first office was in the center of Hempstead above a fish store. And from there, it moved to a trailer on campus. And then finally, we found our current home, which is in a building directly across the street from the law school. That sense of being of the community, of course, extends beyond, though, just physical presence, not just geographic identity. And it extends into how our clinical programs have developed to meet articulated needs in the community. After Sandy, our clinics put together a disaster recovery clinic to assist individuals whose homes had been destroyed and lives upended. We have set up pop-up election day clinics to help individuals who turned away from the polls for minor technicalities, historic election 2008. Well, and we responded to the crackdown on immigrant families by inaugurating a deportation defense clinic and doing a series of DACA renewal work. Ultimately, there are two true measures of our clinic's success at meeting its mission. How well are we partnering with the communities we serve to meet their needs as they articulate them? And how well are we inspiring students to become passionate lawyers with a dedication to social justice? And so let's hear from our panel on three very different ways that those twin goals have been achieved. We're going to hear about filling a glaring gap in representation by doing life-saving asylum work, including for LGBT plus immigrants who are living among Long Island's vibrant immigrant. We'll hear about assisting with the legal challenges, especially during COVID, confronting local nonprofits, small businesses who are focused on improving Long Island. And we'll hear about using impact litigation to empower Latinx clients to counter government-endorsed housing. So I'm going to turn it over to the substance here, and we'll start over with Professor Wren.
Good afternoon. I started the asylum clinic about 15 years ago at Hofstra, and we represent refugees who are fleeing persecution in their home countries on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. The only thing standing between our clients and them getting supported, what we truly believe is persecution or death, is the work that the students do in the clinic. Law school, particularly the first year and a half of law school, as you're going through the core curriculum and you're learning how to read cases, how to write memos. Most of our summer jobs may be also writing memos or editing legal briefs. It can seem dry. It can seem the opposite of powerful. One tremendous lesson I think that students learn in the asylum clinic is the power that an attorney has. It is an amazing thing to, even as a law student, be able to save somebody's life. And I want all of my students to understand that this education gives them the ability to save lives and change the course of clients' lives. About 5 years ago, the Muslim ban happened, and that was loosely a policy that said that immigrants and non-immigrants from Muslim-majority countries were barred from entering the United States. And when the day that this came into effect, there were many people who were detained at airports. They had all the proper paperwork, they had done everything they were supposed to do, but this ban had come into place, and a lot of them were held incommunicado at the airport. I wanted, on that first day, to spend the whole day at the airport, as some of my colleagues were doing, but I had committed to teaching a training. It was a Saturday for just a thrifty nonprofit, and I couldn't back out on that. So I called the attorney who was organizing the the volunteer attorneys at the airport and said, I have to do this training, but I'll come over right after, and I'm sure I can bring my students, and they speak Urdu, they speak Arabic, they speak Farsi, it will help a lot. And there was a pause, and she said to me, Loris, your students are already here. And I sat back and thought, okay, they're learning what I'm trying to teach, which is an amazing thing and an uplifting thing for me. The one thing I would also mention about that example is that the way we've named this clinic gives kind of the impression that maybe our students aren't part, and the marginalized communities may be different communities. Many of our students are from families of immigrants. Many are Muslim, many are Jewish, many are LGBTQ, there are many reasons that they themselves might be a vulnerable population. And my job and really one of my main missions, all of my students, to find their own voices and become the best advocate and attorney that they can. But it is particularly important to me that students have extra barriers in their way as they prepare to become attorneys. It has made our clinic a much better clinic to have a much more diverse and inclusive student body over the years. We have many LGBTQ students in the clinic, and actually, well, that's for many reasons. One, I direct the LGBT fellowship at the Hofstra Law School, but also about a third of our clients are LGBT. And that is, there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons that sadly being LGBT is leads to persecution throughout much of the world. One of the terrific things that the students and I have done together has been when we recognize how vulnerable in particular LGBTQ immigrants on Long Island were, we decided we need to step up and do something about it. As opposed to, we have a close relationship with the LGBT Center in Manhattan. There are so many services and resources available to LGBTQ immigrants in Manhattan, none of which are available on Long Island. And we found that the LGBT centers that did exist on Long Island were not accessible to immigrant LGBTQ people. And we also found that most immigration advocacy agencies did not have specific programs for LGBT people. And given that their communities were, other immigrants are often from the communities that did them, that leave very challenging situations, and many of our clients were just very isolated, and it greatly harmed their mental health and their ability to really find freedom. So we started with the help of Elise, who was not a student at the time, but she was an alumni, an LGBT immigrant support group on Long Island. And that has been going on now for about 7 years. It is led by two of our former clients who are members of the LGBT community. And one of our hugest challenges with this was actually making sure that members of the community remained the leading voices and the decision makers in this group, and that none of the groups that they would partner with that we might partner with would take that away. When another program came into being, Remain in Mexico. This is a program in which asylum seekers were forced to remain in Mexico while their hearings were. So many of our clients, many asylum seekers ended up remaining in Mexico for maybe 2 years. They were literally living on the streets or in tent camps, and often in grave danger. We were particularly concerned about the safety of vulnerable communities there. There's nowhere that is safe for an LGBT person to be living on the street, but Mexico, there's a great deal of violence against LGBTQ people to start with. We are also worried about disabilities and several other vulnerable groups. The LGBT immigrants of Long Island, the group, came to me and said that they were getting emails and messages from people who were stuck in the camps and asking for help, and they wondered whether we could do about it. So I flew down to Mexico to go into the camps to try to give some legal advice and also to take on some cases. And the idea was that students would be able to come down, although there are a number of barriers, in particular COVID, coming up to that. But I walked in to the camp, and there was one of my former students, Erin Thornvela, who had been working there for weeks, worked at the Technical Rights Project, which does not do this sort of individual representation, but she had taken it on herself every weekend to go down and spend most of the weekend there. She had actually started a group for LGBTQ immigrants in the refugee camp. The clinic ended up taking on a few cases. Erin ended up staying there and doing a ton of work and becoming one of the experts on the program and testifying before Congress on it, and bringing a number of class actions to bring individual and groups of people in from the camp. One thing I want to mention here is she was doing it better than I was. So it's not a situation of me showing up as the professor and, teaching my former students how to do things. I went there and I learned from her how to do this best and what I could do most to help. We have a social media group for my alumni, and so I started a hashtag, raising the bar, to describe the works that our students were doing. I love this hashtag. Not a single one of my alumni thinks it's funny or amusing. My current students pretend, but that's only because I'm grading them. But it is an inspiring thing to me that my students are being better attorneys than I could envision them being, my former students. And those are former students who are responding to crises, but they're also students who dedicate their life to this work. There are many ways that they can do it. They have done it in terms of working at nonprofits. Police has worked with government, and being private attorneys, and being incredible attorneys fighting for justice. It is valuable to respond to crisis. It is even more valuable to be there in the battle day and night for all the things that are not hitting the news fairly. Elise is one terrific example of this. Elise was a powerhouse student when she was at Hofstra. She won some national competitions and really excelled. She began working at nonprofits immediately after graduating, but also worked at UNHCR and authored a tremendous report that garnered a lot of attention for the UNHCR. She is multilingual. She could be working at a firm for 6 times the salary that she is making. She could be working on a more high profile international human rights group, and what she is doing is she's the executive director for a small nonprofit on Long Island. She has helped thousands and thousands of clients on Long Island. Long Island is a major immigrant community in this country. All of the attention goes to the big cities, but Long Island is in the top 10 of concentrations of immigrant communities. But we don't get the attention or the resources, and often the attorneys leave Long Island because it's more exciting to work in this. So Elise is here working, saving thousands of lives. She is beloved by the immigrant community. She is also mentoring and being a role model for her staff, for her attorneys, and also for other staff, and often for her clients, and for many in the Latinx community. It, for me, is a privilege and a real pleasure to do this work. And again, the name of the panel being how we teach our students to serve, how we educate our students to serve and represent marginalized populations. I learn at least as much from my students as they learn from me. And I certainly learn also from my alumni. And Elise, as I've watched her move from being a staff attorney to legal director, to taking on the role as executive director. So instead of being in the frustrating but still fun day-to-day fights for representation, to be figuring out how do I raise money to pay for enough attorneys to do this? How do I run an office effectively? How do I supervise people effectively? And stepping up and doing that is something that I'm learning from as I watch her do it, and also as with all of my students doing incredible things, but especially Elise, because I see her on a regular basis, and I'm aware very much of the work that she's doing. It is wonderful, it is gratifying, and it is an inspiration, the work that our former students are able to.
Really nice.
I'm rarely so nice to her.
That's the first time in 10 years. Thank you, Loris, for that introduction. And Dr. Poser, welcome to Hofstra. As Laura said, my name is Elise de Castillo. I am a proud graduate of Hofstra Law School and an even prouder alum of the Hofstra Asylum Clinic. So I knew two things when I started law school. I knew a few more than two, but there were two that were very, very clear to me. One was that I wanted to be an immigration attorney. I came to Hofstra having never been on Long Island before as the Dwight L. Green Scholar, the full tuition scholarship for minority rights advocacy. And it was clear to me that immigration was my path. The second thing that I knew was that I did not want to take a class with Loris Wren. I had heard horror stories about how difficult Professor Wren's classes were. And if her classes were challenging, say nothing of joining the asylum clinic, which was like having a trauma-inducing full-time job during law school.
It's true.
It's true. But I pushed it off until the last semester when I bit the bullet and doubled down, taking both immigration law and the asylum clinic simultaneously. Details of my interview for the asylum clinic are still etched in my mind because that's what PTS does to you. I clearly remember Professor Wren saying to me that she only took the hardest cases that no other attorney would touch. And as a fledgling lawyer, that statement was nothing short of awe-inspiring to me and made it very clear that I was in the right place. I can honestly say that I regret not having listened to the naysayers, because my work at the asylum clinic was without a doubt the most formative experience of those. And I only wish that I had done it sooner. I entered the clinic as a law student, but I left as a lawyer. From day one, Professor Wren made it clear to her students that the stakes for our clients were extraordinarily high, and so her expectations for us were even higher. Lives literally hung in the balance and depended on our ability to be ethical, effective, and passionate advocates for our clients. My first clinic client was a Salvadoran man who had fled his home country after MS-13 savagely murdered multiple members. I had a few short weeks to pull together a case, and I knew that my ability to do so effectively was not only a matter of life or death for my client, but for his wife and 2 young children. A decade and thousands of clients have passed since then, but my heart still tightens in my chest when I think about that moment when I opened the decision and told my client that he had won asylum, that he was finally safe. My dedication to this client was so profound that when he applied for naturalization years later, I traveled to Arkansas. Nobody wants to go to Arkansas. I traveled to Arkansas, where he had moved, to represent him in his citizenship interview. That was my client, and I had to be with him at the end. That client quite literally changed the course of my career. I didn't just go on to be an immigration attorney. Inspired by my experience at the clinic representing Central American asylum seekers, I became an immigration attorney at the Central American Refugee Inauguration, a Long Island-based nonprofit that has been a leader in the immigrant rights movement for nearly 40 years. As though those weren't credentials enough, Professor Wren was herself once an attorney at Inauguration. Besides a host of practical legal skills, if I took one thing with me from my days at the asylum clinic, it was heart. Watching Professor Wren, I learned what it was to care profoundly for my clients, not just for their legal cases, but for their well-being on a very fundamental level. This has in turn made me a far more effective advocate for my clients. It keeps at the fore that I'm not representing a case, I am representing a person. So I'm going to be honest with you guys. It initially was not my plan to stay on Long Island. I thought that I would practice for a few years and move on to greener or at least different pastures. But my experience at the asylum clinic and at Curation opened my eyes to the enormous need in Long Island's immigrant community. Before then, I had no idea that despite its proximity to New York City, immigrants on Long Island have access to a fraction of the services as immigrants in the city. This leaves Long Island's nearly 600,000 immigrants largely without representation. Clinic taught me about the importance of working with the community, of serving those who have the greatest need and the least support. Because of this, I committed to staying here, helping this underserved community. Not only did I stay on Long Island, I stayed at Curation, where I felt that I could make the greatest impact and became executive director last year. As Curation's executive director, I now lead a team of 17 attorneys, paralegals, social workers, community educators, and others, including a ton of amazing volunteers and law students from Hofstra, all in service to Long Island's immigrant community. While I no longer represent clients as I once did, I nevertheless incorporate what I learned at clinic in my work every day. It is my personal goal to inspire the next generation of immigration advocates and instill in them that same dedication to service that Loris Wren did. Curation's merits-blind system for representing asylum seekers prioritizes immigrants at the greatest risk for deportation, not those with the most winnable cases, a direct reflection of Professor Wren's own strategy for case selection. I feel an overwhelming sense of pride when I see our attorneys dive fearlessly into a seemingly impossible case and turn it into a life-saving asylum grant. I have the enviable problem of having to remind staff to take a break now and then because their unwavering dedication to their clients becomes their sole focus, sometimes at the expense of a healthy work. I laugh because in these moments, I see myself a decade earlier, huddled in the cubicle in the clinic office in the early morning hours, quadruple checking the citations on an asylum brief, and I know that I have done that. During law school, my experiences with the clinics were not limited to my own time at the asylum clinic. As an interpreter for numerous other clinics, I had the opportunity to see how all the clinical professors from whom you will be hearing shortly inspired their students in the same way that Professor Wren inspired. Now, as a practitioner, it has been a privilege to continue working with these professors and benefit from their deep commitment to the community. Theo Liebmann, whether he likes it or not, has become Curation's go-to expert on all things related to immigrant children and ethics. Mike Haber has graciously consulted with Curation on numerous occasions to help us troubleshoot thorny issues related to nonprofit law. When Curation sued Nassau County for its illegal detention of immigrants, Steph Krieger's legal expertise, as well as that of the team at the Deportation Defense Clinic, now led by Alex Holt, helped us form a case that ultimately got the county. Many years ago, one particularly religious client described Professor Wren as, I kid you not, the glory of God, and all of her students were like cherubs that surrounded her. While this characterization might be a little over the top, or really more acolytes than cherubs, it captured the enormous respect Professor Wren's students have for her. We strive every day to be the same creative, impassioned, unwavering advocate for our clients that she is for hers. And there is no better preparation for that than the training we received in the asylum clinic. If I am able to help a fraction of the immigrants or inspire a fraction of the young attorneys as she has, I will know that I have succeeded not only as a lawyer, but as
Thank you very much, Professor Wren and Elise. Wow, do you talk about Loris that way? Elise, do you talk about Loris that way in private?
I've
too?
never
That's-
talked about her ever that way.
Anyway, okay, so why don't we hear now from Professor Mike Haber and Alex Kuenberg about some of the work done by the Economic Development Clinic, as I mentioned, work with nonprofits, and in particular during crises times, whether it's storm-related or other, really is deadlock advisor.
So let me start by saying a little bit about what community economic development is. It's integration, it's a term that is unfamiliar. And let me introduce it by talking about not as a legal practice yet, but as a variety of grassroots social. In Brian Glick, Matthew Grossman's seminal article on defines what CED is by looking at practice there was where I used to work, where Alex currently works, or Brian Glick. They define it as, quote, the self-organized effort by residents of low-income communities, A, provide decent, affordable housing, healthcare, childcare, desperately needed service facilities. B, while doing that, creating jobs, business activities for and by local residents, helping to combat effective economic oppression in low-income neighborhoods. C, through that, gaining a degree of community control over local resources, land, and capital as a base for resisting investment gentrification and producing some measure of economic security. So that sounds great. And that's like a very positive spin on CED. I like to also give a negative spin on CED. This is how I teach my students. So CED first emerged in the 1960s when activists and low-income people of color were fighting for resources and fighting for self-determination. And in an era of radicalism and social unrest and urban uprisings, people with a lot of power, Ford Foundation, like Robert F. Kennedy, backed CED as a way to give in to some of these demands while not making major overhauls to any sort of political or social or economic demands that were being made by some. A model of bottom-up self-determination that somehow manages not to offend sort of white America's consensus view that hard work and meritocracy will lift up. So that sort of skeptical view of CED, I think, has some truth to it as well. In my opinion, it ultimately comes too close to stripping our clients, community organizations, of all their. And I see that this nexus between sort of the negative view and the positive view of CED is where the role of lawyers comes in. So I define CED lawyering as a set of practices that emerge from this tension in the interests of powerful funders that aim to simultaneously fund but also exert control for what happens along, and the interests of community activists, organizations that need those resources to develop projects they want to develop and seek to do so with the least interference of interests of banks and real estate. Helping community clients understand and navigate complexities in and among their stakeholders, in and among the very complicated and complex private governmental actors that are exerting influence in their lives. That sort of translation is what. So what does that look like in practice? In some cases, it doesn't look all that different from what regular corporate lawyers do for their regular corporate. People in general sometimes think that corporate lawyers have all this power. Very few people who say like, oh, corporate lawyers, they don't exert enough influence on the political system, right? And that's true, that being able to leverage the law to support a goal has some power. And so when we're working with our clients in transactional work, it sometimes resembles conventional startup work. A local resident has a dream for some community initiative, a small group of people has an idea for business, and we work with them really closely to develop it to a real-world project. So to give some examples from the current semester, a retired businessman wants start a small scholarship fund to support young people of color who want to pursue higher education. A group of Black LGBT artists wants to create an artist retreat for color. 2 women want to start a cooperatively owned business composting across Long Island. A group of artists wants to start an Afrocentric art book publisher to promote upcoming Black artists. A group of undocumented women in the Bronx, Manhattan, wants to launch a funding pool for other undocumented women during the pandemic when many have had their sources of income interrupted. So that's 4 or 5 of roughly 25 to 30 projects that we have going on at any time. All those groups come to us looking to start up their projects. We help them develop their plans, develop their corporate structures. Are they a business? Are they a nonprofit? Are they a cooperative? Are they something else? They incorporate a business corporation or form an LLC. If they're a nonprofit, how are they going to fund their work? What do they need to have in place if they want to legally hire employees? We work with each group as partners, close collaborators on all these kinds of things. At times we're a business coach, sometimes we're a strategist, sometimes we're sort of a generic, broad scale problem solver, issue spotter. Sometimes we're narrowly a corporate lawyer, advising people on the difference between S corps and LLCs. You'll see on, the chart's very far away, so I can't actually get it, but you'll see on that chart, that kind of startup work is roughly half of what our total. But our community partnerships really grow with time, and that's where some of those other categories of work come in, what I call that chart, project counsel, real estate transaction. So of our clients that are startups, roughly half of them stay in our lives. We keep up those relationships. They come back to us periodically with questions, come back to us periodically with small issues. They have a contract that have a question about an employee who has some issue. And over the years, fast forward 5 or 10 years, came to us, they wanted to incorporate, get tax exemption. And now they're looking to rent a commercial space for they're thinking about buying a building, spinning off a subsidiary. Maybe they're doing a corporate restructuring or a merger or an acquisition. Maybe they finally got an investor and they're ready to finally hire their first couple. Our role expands as their work gets more complex, from routine startup stuff to sophisticated transactional law. I think Professor Wren and I share a desire to take on clients that might be commercially unreasonable to take on, that no lawyer could ever make a living charging them for the amount of time their projects need. But in itself, it's a really unique position to be in, where you can give that kind of deep and needed legal support to somebody to really make. So I want to quickly tell stories of 2 of our clients that have been with us for quite a while, just to give a little taste of what it's like. We began representing a group called Uniondale Community Land Trust, based right here in Uniondale, 2011. First helped them file 5. Their long-term goal was to build affordable housing in Uniondale using community land trust model. The somewhat complicated model that aims to make housing permanently affordable, taking it out of the speculative market by separating ownership of buildings from the ownership of the land on which. In a certain way, it's kind of a symbolic form of affordable housing, in that the community takes ownership literally of the land, literally of the ground that community sits on, a community institution. So over the decade of our relationship, we've provided legal support to their efforts to raise raise funds, to identify properties that they're buying, help develop bylaws, find put from stakeholders, homeowners, trust. We help them review funding contracts, architect contracts, construction contracts, consultant contracts, grant contracts, loan contracts. We help them acquire multiple houses and begin reselling them to local community members, doing real estate closings and expanding affordable housing, stabilizing sale in a way that's providing real benefit to people right here in Hofstra. Second example is a little further away in Bushwick, Brooklyn. We began working with an organization called Mayday Space in Bushwick, founded by activists who'd met at Occupy Wall Street, I guess, a year earlier. But all of those people had experience working in the nonprofit world prior. And they had a dream of creating a space that would, in their language, a place where there'd be some cross-pollination in community-based organizations that had been existing for decades and the sort of new activist spirit that was in the air in they also sought to develop a unique collaboration with a for-profit bar and restaurant called Star Bar, which is willing to support their initiatives, give a portion of their profit to Mayday Space to sort of subsidize. Mayday obtained a space in 2014. Star Bar opened up a few blocks away. Over the years, we've represented both of them, helped Star Bar with pretty standard small business issues, paying off startup investors, staffing questions, corporate structuring, helped Mayday obtain 501c3 status, draft bylaws that resonate with a sort of Occupy style, horizontalist governance structure. We've counseled it through the pandemic on getting PPP loans, on compliance with reopening regulations, which are quite complicated in a nonprofit space that mostly doesn't serve food, but does serve food. And we're currently working with it as it to expand its facilities and even expand it. I should say expand its facilities from what it currently has, which is 6 or 8 rooms of the size of, so not an. In all these kinds of project counsel and real estate matters, we partner closely. My students and I providing long-term service semester after semester, sometimes for a decade, sometimes longer, to build a real and lasting partnership with community across the island into the 5 boroughs. The model has also allowed us to have some flexibility in order to adapt to urgent needs that arrive. When Sandy hit Long Island, and today in the Cope. Over the last year, our model has gone from being roughly 1/3 small businesses and 2/3 nonprofits, give or take, to now our second largest category of clients are COVID response, especially groups that identify themselves as my colleague at Seattle Law School defines mutual aid project comprised of 3 elements. One, they work to meet people's basic needs while they simultaneously build shared mutual understanding why people that already have those needs. 2, they mobilize people, encourage community solidarity, build and expand social movements. And 3, they're collective and participatory, not governed in a sort of top-down. Due to the Hofstra Clinic ties to the local mutual aid projects forming very early in the pandemic, started to receive questions from clients, friends of our clients, associates of our clients, all across New York. What are the risks of starting a project? How should we open a bank account if we aren't incorporated? Should we partner with a bigger nonprofit, or should we try to run this ourselves? What happens if someone gets sick while they're working with us? Is it worth the time and expense to apply for tax exemption? Because the pandemic is only going to last, a couple months, right? How does fiscal sponsorship work? Are we subject to safety laws? What happens if I receive money through my personal Venmo account and suddenly I get a tax bill? With the help of a small team of research assistants, I've pulled together a legal guide to common questions in the course of a couple of weeks, despite caveats about it being based on New York law and posting it to an academic website called SSRN that no one would, that isn't an academic, I don't think. Miraculously, the document has been downloaded between that and another website 5,000 or 7,000 times, which is quite a lot for a technical guide. Mutual aid groups all around the country and even outside of the country have read the legal guide. I've gotten calls, sometimes with thank yous, but more often with questions, from groups all over the place. I've spoken to prison abolitionists in Chicago, the Black Lives Matter group that were working around Derek Chauvin trial, mutual aid groups in Southern Oregon responding to the wildfires late summer, mutual aid groups in Austin responding to the Texas blackout situation, and the group that's doing most of the coordination of resources for the families that were families by our work here on Long Island, local groups like Theo and us, has, it's fair to say, have been rippling out, and can see it having an impact on community organizations really all over the place. I'm proud that the work done here has had a small role to play in supporting all these projects and influence projects various. Building this kinds of partnership is central to how I personally have always used the law and would always want to use the law. And so it's always really exciting to me when, like Alec, go on community-based legal work and partner in New York. Also especially exciting that Alec at my former home, Brooklyn A, where I have very fond feelings for Brooklyn A. Their current executive director was my very close collaborator and still close friend, where it's thrilling to take me on that. So that'll turn it over to Alec.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Professor Haber, for your introduction. And I'm very happy to be here today. It's wonderful to hear from all the professors and alumni about their community, about the work now, and hope it inspires you. I am very happy to be here today to talk about my time in law school, how my experience working in clinic led to my current employment, where I work marginalized. A little bit about myself first. I'm a senior staff attorney. I work at the Consumer Economic Advocacy unit. We defend homeowners in foreclosure. We litigate deed theft issues, very prevalent in right now with a lot of schemes going on. And I also do bankruptcy, file Chapter 7 and Chapter 15. Generally, we file those bankruptcy proceedings to preserve homeownership through our. And we also have a low income tax. Unlike Elise, when I went, I had no idea what I wanted to do. No idea what I wanted to practice. Actually, not even sure what I'm doing right now. But I'm extremely happy and I'm extremely satisfied to this is one of the most rewarding experiences. Experience. Wonderful. Prior to my work at BK and doing community-based work, I was into community economic development. under Professor Haber's. This was my first experience doing community-based work in a legal sense. There, I was able to work with several nonprofits, several small businesses, and assist them in legal matters. I was able to connect with organizations, high-quality legal assistance. Always find it, sometimes support it. As part of my work at the clinic, the variety of I could draft articles of organization and bylaws for one nonprofit, could help a nonprofit draft lease agreement with the landlord, help an individual decide whether the LLC pays a help provider. Ask a regular. I could help nonprofit file tax exempt status, dealing with the experience that I received here, probably later on, and they work. My work at the clinic exposed me to the need of community lawyering. There's a need for that kind of lawyering. Help communities empower them, help them. A lot of people can receive a lot of benefit, significant amount of. At the clinic, we were helping organizations, helping communities all over. Nonprofit dealing in education, help start up. There will be a nonprofit that has environmental goals. There was a nonprofit gender, and us doing basic legal work, help them power and turn those nonprofits to help a lot of people. And we could also help small businesses as well. In my start, how to do it, having like there, this does help. My experience at the clinic work provider, where still do a lot of work. We maintain very close relations with community-based organizations in both. One of the things that I see most when people in those communities have a legal, they don't know where to go, don't know where to seek assistance. However, they know that there are community-based organizations there where they can always go. Us partner up with those organizations. Then those organizations can contact. So keeping close ties. I often partner up with those on different topics, generally on the work side. Especially now, New York, second biggest number 2 state in the country. Affected that tremendous. Very important. State homeowners. Let them know what rights they have. I'm very grateful for my experience, and I would say that experience led me to my profession. And I encourage everyone to consider working in communities. And this is some of the most. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike and I almost called you Professor Alex. Maybe one day,
It's the
Alex.
second time that happened.
That's happened. And now we're going to hear from the dean of the professors up here, Deane in small d, who's the professor who's been around longer than. Well, I'm working up to something good, Steph. Don't worry. Who's been around more than any of us up here in terms of the clinic, and has become both through having been around for the clinic for many years, but also through his inspiration, has really been the heart and soul of the clinic since I've been here 20 years, and has been a great mentor and a great role model for all of us here, and is going to speak to us now about your longest lasting case.
One of them.
One of the longest lasting cases, and how it came about, and how it has inspired students. So take it away, Steph.
Thanks. A decade and a half ago, in October 2004, frantic tenants from an apartment building in the village of Farmingdale, Long Island, came to my clinic for help. At 1 a.m. the previous night, the fire department had awakened the families and removed them from the building because of a possible fire hazard, and relocated them to a gym at SUNY Farmingdale. Despite the fact that their building was in serious disrepair, infested with vermin and mold, and lacking in basic maintenance, the families wanted to return to their home. My students took up the challenge. They interviewed 15 tenants that night, and after heated meetings with the village attorney, in 2 days, the tenants returned. And so began my clinic's decade-long saga with over 100 students representing the residents of 150 Sagatog, Farmingdale. We eventually brought a federal lawsuit on behalf of some of the tenants of the building. The building has 54 units, and starting in the early 1990s, was a magnet for Hispanic and other immigrant families. Many white village residents became concerned about the increasing Hispanic population in the area. The blogs were filled with hateful posts, and village officials began to explore plans for redeveloping the building and the surrounding area. And with these redevelopment plans looming, the building's owner let it go into further disrepair. That's when we met the tenants. We began by bringing a lawsuit on behalf of the tenants against the landlord to get the building brought up to code, but then the village recruited a developer to gut renovate the building, evict all the tenants, and build luxury apartments. So we switched gears and focused our attention on the redevelopment plan. In May 2006, on behalf of 9 Latino tenants in the building, the Sagatog 9, all immigrants who had fled persecution and abuse in their native countries, we filed a federal housing discrimination case against the village, alleging that it had targeted the building and the surrounding areas for redevelopment because of their largely Latino population. The tenants left the building under a monetary settlement with the developer, but they had lost the community that they had enjoyed at that building many years. So we continued the case for 8 more years against the village, seeking monetary damages for loss of community and for an injunction ordering the village to replace all 54 units of lost low-income housing. We successfully defended against the village's motions to dismiss and summary judgment. We engaged in extensive discovery, and for all those years of extensive litigation, as it slowly plodded on, the plaintiffs, all 9 of the Sagatog 9, stuck it out. Finally, in January 2014, we were scheduled for a 4 to 6 week jury trial in federal court in Brooklyn. 4 days before the trial, the village buckled and settled the case, agreeing to pay substantial damages to each of the 9 tenants, and agreeing to actively recruit developers over the next 10 years to replace all the lost low-income housing. As of today, almost 50 of those 54 units of low-income housing have been built or are in the pipeline built. Now, much of the scholarly literature addressing the advocacy on behalf of disadvantaged clients, and subordinated community is quite critical of impact litigation, but in this case, because it is claimed it disempowers disadvantaged communities. Many scholars argue that right-based litigation actually stifles the development of community among subordinated people. The use of legal doctrine and rules to frame litigation, it is argued, constricts client narrative to the limited framework of legal theories. In other words, it is argued, disadvantaged clients are placed in an alien legal straitjacket in which they are not comfortable. As one scholar puts it, client voices are interrupted by legal rules. Moreover, these scholars contend because of the special expertise required in these cases, clients become passive bystanders to the litigation. Lawyers frame the story, they present them, they orchestrate the proceedings. As one writer observes, once the complaint is filed, client disappears, the lawyers take command. And finally, some scholars assert that even if successful victories in impact cases have no lasting positive effect on disadvantaged communities. The focus of the attorney and the client, it is argued, is on the legal outcome. And if that outcome is achieved, everyone believes they're done. Long-term systemic change doesn't occur, so these scholars write. While admittedly some impact litigation suffers from the maladies identified by these scholars, our experience in the Segatype case calls into question that, contrary to the view of the critics of impact litigation, as my clinic students collaborated with the plaintiffs to litigate the case over 8 years, the clients actually became active participants in the litigation. Actually, the litigation created a client community. They felt empowered to control the process. How did it happen? Over the 8 years, students convened countless meetings with the client building, or after they left at a Latinx community center nearby. At first, some of the clients deferred to us, but as the students methodically interpreted the procedural and substantive legal rules at meetings, the clients took charge. My students and I deferred to them, as we often told the client when they were making a tough decision, "You're our boss." And when the case dragged on for years, or when a negative procedural decision was rendered against them, some of the clients were about ready to give up. But those meetings provided a forum for the clients to vent their feelings, and for their leaders to press the group on. Moreover, we encouraged the clients to work as a team during case preparation. When it came time for the depositions in the case, for example, the clients faced entry into a technical process which, of course, seemed quite foreign to them. So my students partnered them up for support during both the preparation process and the depositions themselves. As a result, to the surprise of the village attorneys, at the depositions, the clients were not the pushovers that they expected and actually told persuasive and compelling stories about their damages, which I believe led to the settlement. Additionally, even when difficult strategic decisions were required in the case, my students used the meetings, in the words of one of our clients, as classrooms on the law. As a result, through the ups and downs and favorable and adverse court decisions and trial preparation, for every major decision in the litigation, the clients made the ultimate decisions and arrived at difficult, consensus-based decisions together. I attribute the success in overcoming the problems arising from impact litigation on 2 factors. First, the model of lawyering we use focused on recognizing the dignity of our, that their case was not simply a vehicle for establishing some legal precedents which we could tout, or pursuing an ideological agenda. Rather, our focus was on ensuring that the voices of the clients would be heard both in our case planning and in the presentation of the case. But most importantly, our success was attributable to the strength courage of the client. Ironically, many of the critiques of impact litigation bemoan such cases as disempowering client voice, underestimate the actual grit of many folks in disadvantaged communities. Most of our clients were strong and courageous enough to withstand gang violence, civil war, domestic violence in their native country. They were able to find their way to America, to reestablish themselves in Farmingdale, and to develop a strong community in the village. They were by no means simple wallflowers. They just needed a portal to have their voices heard in the legal system, and that was the role our clinic could play. So, what about the long-term strategic change, systemic change? In 2004, when we first became involved with the case, at public hearings at Village Hall, many white residents freely expressed bigoted sentiments about the Latino population. 10 years later, at the press conference announcing the settlement of the case, that's the picture in the middle there of that press conference with the clients and my students. The village's new mayor walked off the dais, shook hands with all the clients, welcoming them back to the village. And just this year, when a public hearing was held by the village to consider a large development of low-income housing to comply with the settlement agreement, the public comment, and I really was amazed by it, focused solely on substantive issues like, will there be enough parking? What about congestion? But all the public participants at that hearing expressed wholehearted support for the development of an inclusive community in Farmingdale. The Sagatuck impact litigation then was a win-win for the clients and for the Latino and white communities in Farmingdale. And now I'd like to turn it over to one of the students, one of my former students, Jonathan Samir, who convened one of those first meetings in 2005 and 2006 with the partners, and for 2 to 3 hours for each of these events, would walk the clients through the upsides and the downsides, and would help them with the case, and who now continues in that role at New Haven Legal.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Yoni Zamir. Welcome to new president. That's okay. I'm not going to take it personally. It's really an inspiration to be back here and be speaking to people and to hear from my colleagues and former alums have also had such tremendous impact on these communities that we're here in Long Island, a place of immense wealth and privilege, and to be surrounded also almost invisibly in many senses, at least as I felt it then, by people who are in these communities that are largely marginalized. I was thinking that the thing that struck me the most when I came to Long Island, and I come from the suburbs of Chicago originally, so it's not like I was growing up in a difficult, hardscrabble place, but to come to New York and then in Long Island as an extension of New York, and to see all of that. I had a background in public interest law and in direct service to communities, but not in the direct way that I came upon in the clinic. I don't think anyone ever, actually I do think somebody described Professor Krieger. I'm fairly certain that one of the folks in that picture may have well described him as the glorious God as well. But I think that's speaking a lot about the work that we did. I think similar to you, I came in not knowing exactly how I wanted to use my legal education, but that I knew I had some role models coming in who were public interest lawyers, and I thought I should really be able to use my skills to be able to work with people, to help people and connect people with people and help them access the law. what I had to learn when I came to become Steph's student was the very, very humbling experience of all of the hard work that goes into learning how to be a lawyer. And Steph was intent on teaching us all that, almost to a sort of military degree, which, I benefit from still today when I take notes on calls that I have with clients. And I have probably 60 active cases right now of clients. I do housing work, right? I do housing work still today. Sometimes it's regarding conditions. Sometimes it's regarding evictions, sadly. Right now, there's a lot of folks out there who are trying to struggle through what the pandemic has brought for the communities that I work with. And the communities that I work with are in the New Haven area, both Latinx as well as African American and various other communities that have historically been disenfranchised, right? We never got, for Black folks, they never got the promise that was made to them of the 40 acres and a mule, right? So they do not have the generational wealth. For the Latinx communities who came here from war-torn places and immigrate here to do the work and to be in the background and to sort of be almost invisible, those people are real people who then have families and have children, and those people become part of our communities and they cannot be ignored. And so representing them as a student who was really an extension of Steph Krieger, we would go to Farmingdale often on an evening like this, and then the time change makes it even darker at 5 or 6 p.m. My partner and I would go to the building and start knocking on doors and going in people's apartments, and everybody was incredibly welcoming. And to young, my partner happened to be Latina, but it didn't really matter. I mean, they were opening their doors. We identified ourselves, and next thing you know, we're standing in their apartments. We're being offered food. We're saying, no, we're here to communicate and talk to you about what's happening. And at the time that I became involved in the case, it was only just after 2004 and the displacement that they suffered. Now, if you or I, as I'm not speaking for anyone else here but myself, somebody of means, got displaced by fire or flood or neglect on the part of a landlord, certainly I've been a tenant in the past for many years, I would be outraged. I'd be accessing my services. I would be calling everyone and their mother. I'd be calling the news. I would be calling my congressperson if necessary, the mayor, etc., the code enforcement office, right? And not just because I'm a lawyer, but these folks were humble and quiet and not complaining, and we were horrified by what we saw. And it really propelled all of us to work harder to represent these people and to give them a voice. And Steph was as visible as he could be, given his other obligations of teaching, etc. But it was interesting at that point to feel like a law student who knew very little except how to try and speak to people and be direct with them and give them respect. And we learned from the feedback that they gave us. They showed us how to give them that voice. And so we'd go to the El Centro de Trabajadores, right? It was the worker center very close to the building, and we'd give these sort of informational sessions about what's happening, and we would take questions, and we'd literally have to say, well, we have to scurry back in some senses and talk to our professor, and sometimes they laughed at us, and they said, well, you're the conduit. I think at the beginning it felt like maybe in some ways it felt almost disrespectful. Like why doesn't Steph come here himself, right? Why doesn't Professor Krieger come to every meeting? Couldn't possibly do that. And that's the beautiful thing about the clinic model is that you're empowered as a law student to say, I can do this. I'm going to remember the things that I've been taught in the class, right? And remember what not to say is as important as what I do say, not to overpromise. But to stick to the facts, right? What does the law say that we can do? And what have we identified as a group are your client objectives? And so I do that today with my clients, right? I still do that. The empowerment that you give to people who are not typically empowered, who are disadvantaged, meaning that they're living sort of subject to a system that's been put on them, right? They're not participants in that system. They're not lawyers. They're not accounting professionals. They're just people. Maybe they have much more sort of conventional, regular jobs, they don't have the power to sway things. No congressperson is calling them up and saying, what do you think we should do with this policy or that? Should I vote yes or no on this? But to give them that voice and to be able to say, you know, I'm your lawyer. I'm directed by you, right? We did that then. I learned how to do that then, and I learned how to do that now. And I think, you know, listening to the juxtaposition of how these communities of real people who are getting discriminated based on, you know, sexual preference or gender or whatever it is, they're real people who live in our communities, and to hear that they have like this awesome resource, you know, and to know that people have been giving something so important as the right to live in a free society unencumbered versus what they may have been forced to leave, willing or unwillingly. You know, that's a right, that's a human right. And then to give them, you know, housing is not a right in America, right? We don't have a right to housing. But as I educate people, as I educate my clients and speak to my clients about what I do, I'm always sort of propelled by those first experiences that I had, being afraid to go in, being afraid to knock on those doors, right? Now people are knocking on my door and banging down my door, so go figure, right? I mean, I was afraid to knock on their door, and now I can't hide fast enough to get a night's sleep without people calling me or texting me and saying, can you help my friend out, etc. So it's humbling because there's so many people that need help. And so again, going back to that clinic model of having somebody who, you know, 100 law students over the course of 10 years, et cetera, you know, more than a decade, to work on a case, to litigate it, literally to almost picking a jury in federal court in the Eastern District, and then to know that it's getting substantive outcomes for a village like Farmingdale, which is in the heart of this, you know, very, very well-to-do place. And the thing is that the people who live there may not feel like they're well-to-do, which is always our, you know, sort of subjective perspective. But the eye-opening experience of being a student, going and getting to do that case, and then coming back to it later. I came back to it and worked as a fellow with Professor Krieger after spending some time in Congress and getting to see the sort of global policy level way things operate in this country. And now I'm back doing legal services, right? I mean, it was really always being able to help people directly one-on-one. So I thank you for that. You know, that was really, I've said it before, but I you know, you really mentored me to being able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing those experiences and the love of your professors and your clients and the work you do. I will endeavor to speak for the panel to say many of us, maybe all of us, will stay up here to answer some questions. The session is over now. Thank you guys all for coming, but we'll stick around for any questions if people want to come up, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do think somebody